Hey everybody, Matt Hunkler here, and I am really excited about this session because in this session, we are talking all about opportunities for Unvalley HQs, meaning headquarters outside of traditional tech hubs like Silicon Valley, New York City, and Boston. Obviously, a lot of conversation about this on social media lately. You've probably seen it in the headlines. So many companies moving their headquarters or starting an HQ2 in other tech hubs, sort of in the Unvalley. And we have just the person to talk to from the powder keg community. Larry Gigerich is with us here today, and he is a nationally recognized economic development leader with more than 30 years of local and state government, not-for-profit, and private sector experience. Larry's who I go to and refer most startups and VCs to when looking for that next HQ. And throughout his career, Larry has worked on approximately 600 economic development projects, resulting in over $12 billion in capital investment, the creation of over 100,000 new jobs, and the retention of over 200,000 existing jobs. Here today is Larry Gigerich, Executive Managing Director at Genovis. Larry, thanks for being here.
Absolutely, Matt. It's always great to spend time with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, likewise. And thanks for partnering up with us on this. I think so aligned with all the big trends that are happening right now in tech between the coasts and just tech in general. But let's set the stage before we dive in. Most of our audience listening in today is from tech hubs between the coasts, places like Nashville, Dallas, and Indianapolis, or considering a move of part of their business or themselves and their family to one of those tech hubs. You and I have talked a ton about the concept of place and investing in place. So why is it important for states and regions in the middle of the country to invest in talent, quality of place, and infrastructure?
Yeah, I think there's a few things, and certainly, Powder Keg's done a lot of great work in this area as it relates to talking about places that aren't on the coast and helping build those tech communities and ecosystems. But I think in particular, when you look at investing in quality of place, looking at talent, it's particularly important for those non-coastal locations because those are places where aren't always top of mind for VCs and for tech firms that are based on the coast. So I think that investment, and then as importantly, and whether it's Powder Keg or other outlets, telling that story about the investments you've made are critically important because, again, what we've always found, whether it's a place like Indianapolis or Nashville or Columbus, Dallas, wherever it may be, when people really get to understand what assets are there, and especially if someone will make a visit to those areas, they have a great chance of convincing them to invest and deploy talent assets there. So I think that's really the key driver, is it helps build that awareness and make your area a very attractive area.
Do you have any examples or even stories of cities that are doing interesting things that you might not see a Silicon Valley or a New York City doing to attract those headquarters?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So I'll point to maybe just two quick examples. So one would certainly be in Nashville, Tennessee. Yeah. Nashville has done a great job of not only investing in quality of place, but they have built an entire talent campaign over the last few years to not only harness that talent coming out of universities and colleges in Tennessee and then nearby states, but also attracting talent from around the US and around the world. And they've put together a great interactive website and really have communicated well about what they're doing in that area and linking those two pieces together. The other one I'd point to, which is a brand new initiative that's just been announced, and that's been in Indianapolis. The Indianapolis region has just launched what they're calling Project Amplify. And that is telling the story about the Indy region, its great quality of place assets, and why it should be a destination for talent to relocate to. So some really exciting things going on that I think will provide a competitive edge moving forward.
When you talk to companies about cities like Indy and Nashville, what are some of those quality of place things, particularly that stand out about these Unvalley cities?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things that we've noted in conversations with our clients and with VC firms. I think they're recognizing that there is a diversity in lifestyle choices that people can have in places like Nashville and Indianapolis, meaning people can choose to live and work in an urban environment, in a suburban area, and even an ex-urban area, because the ability to move around a region and not have congestion or that so-called hassle factor that maybe you see in a very large metropolitan area. I think that is very attractive to people as they look at markets like that. I think certainly another from a quality of place perspective is just some of those assets that are around arts and cultural amenities and sports that maybe, again, people may not think about top of mind, but once they hear about them and understand them, it's very attractive. And then when you overlay that with kind of your cost of living piece of it and how much further your dollar will go in that market to take advantage of the great assets that are there, that's super attractive to people.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think we can probably go even deeper on some specific examples a little further on in the conversation. But the company you lead, Genovis, helps tech companies definitely tie into this concept of place by site selection and securing economic incentives, which I know I have experienced personally having a headquarters here in Indianapolis. But the pandemic era has definitely shaken the sort of traditional understanding of place, and most of the tech world is definitely working remotely now. Our whole team is completely remote first now. We're all on a virtual event. So, how has this shift to remote work impacted the concept of place, and how can both cities and tech companies find the big opportunity in the changes that have happened this year?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and there's a couple things I think that I would share. At least we've observed in conversations with our clients and what we've seen happen in different areas. So there's without a doubt this shift to remote work, and I think people being pleasantly surprised that the technology tools are better than maybe what people thought they would be, and productivity has been very good as well for many people that are working remotely. There's without a doubt, we're going to see some permanent shift, especially I think with tech companies having a workforce work remotely on a permanent basis. I mean, it won't be everyone, but that is definitely going to be something we're going to see as a long-term trend. And as a result of that, I think the challenge that places really face, and companies for that matter, is saying, okay, we're not going to have this physical asset, meaning an office where you're going to show up to work every single day and have to report there. But at the same time, we want to be able to track the best and the brightest. So, maybe you've got an indirect line drawn to a location in Nashville, Indiana, as an example, but you may live in Indiana and complete that work, or Ohio or Iowa or anywhere. So I think that'll be really interesting to watch. Plus, the other thing is, and we're seeing a lot of states start to do this, is recognize that some employees are not going to go to a physical location every day to work anymore. And because of that, they're making changes to their incentive programs to make to allow those companies to take advantage of incentives if they have remote workers working for them, even though, again, they're not in a physical office location. I think the other thing, the quick thing I'll just add, is that we are also seeing some of those companies that are in very large coastal cities, in downtown areas, saying, hey, to shift and mitigate risk as we go forward, looking at some of these areas that Powder Keg has focused on across the country, not located in the coast, is something we think will create a lot of opportunities going forward as well.
Absolutely. And of course, one of the stories that we've covered a lot this year at Powder Keg, and I know you've spoken about as well, and we've covered some of the things and your perspectives just because you see so much here in the middle of the country, is that sort of the mighty middle cities are appearing in a lot of those top places to live charts, while places like California in particular are dropping to the bottom of those lists. We've seen that the trends that these CEOs and tech workers are moving away from California to places in the middle of the country is definitely creating a big shift, not just in tech, but in all industries. So are there any specific competitive advantages that you've heard from some of either your clients or people who work at the companies that you work with, or even just people in your network, of why they're locating or relocating to areas between the coasts over more traditional tech hubs like a Boston and New York or SF?
Yeah, so I would point to a couple of things I think that are important. So if you think about some of those coastal locations that you mentioned, we have always had in those places, a higher tax structure, a pretty comprehensive regulatory environment, very high cost of living, and all those things have been there. And in some cases, those have been, ignored or just kind of pushed off to the side because, there are other really great amenities about those areas, especially when it comes to talent. But I think then when you layer in a situation like we've been in with this pandemic and with some other things that have impacted some of those densely populated urban areas, it's opened the playing field more. So specifically to your question, Matt, I think one of the things that we've heard from clients is, okay, as time has moved forward, and in particular, as a lot of companies and VC firms have invested or acquired businesses that started in a non-coastal place, the area, again, Powder Keg is so focused on, and our practice is focused on, people have said, wow, we didn't have an appreciation for how much talent that's there. And then when you add on to that, the price point for this talent. So, I mean, a classic example without a doubt is Salesforce, and when they acquired ExactTarget, they were only in very large locations across the world. And then they saw the talent that was here and said, okay, this talent is really, really good and can help us drive our business. They've grown immensely, almost doubled in size since that acquisition. But the price point is so much better than they experience in some of these coastal locations. So that's been really important. And then I think the other thing, again, is that for all the things that these coastal locations have to offer, just the hassle factor of dealing with a lot of things that are there day-to-day life. And, when you live in California and your commute on a good day could be 30 or 40 minutes, on a really bad day, it's 2 hours. And, pretty much in these other locations, Indianapolis, Columbus, Nashville, et cetera, a bad day could be a 45-minute commute. That does speak to people, I think, in a lot of ways now. And we're seeing that with our clients as well.
Well, and I've even heard that one of the biggest contributors to happiness, or the strongest correlation to happiness in individuals, is the length of their commute. Basically, the shorter their commute, the happier they are overall in life, which is definitely something I've kept in mind this year as my commute has moved from, I don't know, it was probably only 10 minutes here in Indianapolis to 10 seconds, which of course has its drawbacks as well, with the home office, being always at home and the potential to always potentially be working. But certainly something that the middle of the country's benefited from is just this sort of better traffic, better transportation, and less densely populated areas.
For sure. And I think then all of us experiencing this COVID world the last 9 months too, and how that, I think, for a lot of people has changed their perspective on work-life balance, and also, having the opportunity. And as you said, there's pluses and minuses, but having the opportunity to work from home, if you have school-age children, being able to be around them more, even though that means you're also turning into a teacher besides being a parent in a lot of respects. But I do think there'll be some permanent realignment we'll see going forward, and some of those issues will matter more to people after we emerge from this COVID environment we're in.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too when you think about these tech hubs in the middle of the country. Certainly, there has been a big shift. We all saw the unemployment reports over the last several months, varying unemployment reports over the last several months. It's interesting being in kind of the bubble of tech, where companies seem to still be looking to double and triple in size. You mentioned Salesforce multiplying their force here in Indianapolis for their largest headquarters outside of the Bay Area in Indianapolis. How do you see companies continue to evolve their companies as we look into 2021? Are tech companies going to continue to invest and continue to build teams, or are you seeing that kind of pull back from where it was maybe early 2020?
Well, I think it's an excellent question, Matt. And I think from our perspective, as we've done work with our clients, especially again looking at tech companies all the way from young startups to fast growing companies and large, very large companies, they're continuing to grow. I mean, through all this, without a doubt, they're continuing to grow. Certainly, the shift to hiring more people that are working remotely, again, not only for this COVID period we're in, but that are going to work remotely on a permanent basis. That I think that will be something that will definitely play out as we go forward. So, as an example, some of our clients have said to us, hey, right now in the tech world, 10 to 15% of our employees already work remotely on a permanent basis. That's probably going to be 20 to 30% after we emerged from COVID-19, again, for some of the reasons we talked about earlier. So what that does mean from a practical standpoint is tech companies will probably lease less real estate square footage going forward, because they're going to have more people working remotely. But from a headcount growth and that race for talent that we always talk about, I don't think that's going to change at all. And they've continued to experience growth. And in some ways, because so much of the tech community is doing things to help power a virtual world or an e-commerce world, whatever it may be, let alone managing client relationships. All of those things, I think, lead to a really bright outlook, continued bright outlook for tech. And again, it probably just means we're going to see more people working remotely, smaller footprints for companies from a real estate perspective, but see their employment numbers continue to grow.
I'm definitely looking forward to that. And that matches kind of what we're seeing just in our community of a couple thousand tech companies. It does seem like overall things are optimistic. People still stepping on the accelerator, as high growth tech companies tend to do. And it's definitely interesting to see how many more people are interested in potentially relocating, either for a new job to work in person and be close to whatever physical headquarters there are, or to stay at the company they're at, but say, hey, I want to live closer to family, or I want to live closer to the mountains or the Great Lakes, and be open to making that shift for that, as you said, sort of quality of life. One thing I see Genovis just being really expert in is just, you have so much data. And of course, you powered all of our city pages data with some of that quality of place information. I shouldn't say all of it, but quite a bit of the data that we have on that city page. And I'll link an example up here for those that are watching. You can see it in the channel here and hop in. You can hop on the link there and check out the Indianapolis city page just as an example. Obviously, there's lots of different things that make a place desirable. When you're talking to companies, what things do you encourage them to prioritize when it comes to cities and place, when choosing where to have an HQ to, or if they're looking to relocate headquarters? Which things does talent tend to care most about?
Yeah, I think in particular, when you look at the talent component, which, even again in this COVID world, still is the leading factor in 85 to 90% of the projects we work on. We, as a firm, I mean, sometimes we'll see in manufacturing and logistics some other factors that are, equally important. But having said that, from a talent perspective, it's a handful of things that are really important for our clients to look at. We're always encouraging to look at, the quality of the workforce, and that can range for everything from degrees to certifications, industry recognized credentials. I mean, that's one of the things that we do, is really analyze that and share that data with our companies to understand what that market has to offer. Certainly, again, important, but not as important as that cost, that cost point for that talent as well, something we look at. But again, we also are talking about things like cost of living, crime rates, congestion or ease of commute. Those things are very important to them as well. Again, because talent, you think about especially this well-educated younger talent. I've got 3 in college right now, and I know kind of what they're thinking about as they progress through school and think about their careers. They're going to pick where they want to live first and figure out the job second. The key for them is really understanding and finding those markets where they can go to work for company A. And, when they're ready to make a change, there's 10 other companies that they can go to work for that are really interesting to them. So I think that's important. The final thing I would say is, we also say to our clients, hey, look at the places not on the coast that are seeing growth in their metropolitan areas, because that's a good indicator of not only forward momentum, but also that it's becoming a destination for talent. So when you look at places like, again, Nashville, Indianapolis, Columbus, Dallas, Denver, Salt Lake, places like that, they're seeing significant growth that outpaces growth for other communities or regions in the central part of the country. And that's a really good indicator as you kind of trend things out going forward for where companies can have success.
When companies are making these moves, or people are making these moves, what kinds of challenges do they tend to run into that maybe if they knew about it in advance, it might be easier to overcome those challenges? Because obviously, I mean, I have not moved my headquarters before. That's not true. I guess I spun up a SF headquarters working at my last funded startup in 2013. But I haven't gone the other direction from the Valley to the middle of the country. What are some of the challenges that companies face when starting another headquarters that maybe you could call out in advance where they could kind of think about them and overcome those obstacles before they pop up?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges is really just understanding the differences between where they are now and what that new market has to offer. And in some ways, it ends up being a pleasant surprise. So by that I mean, I'll take one of our clients as an example. Moving them from the Bay Area to the Dallas Fort Worth area. Their only view kind of the world was, okay, here's what it's like to interact with government on regulatory and permitting and tax related things, whatever it may be, Matt. And then we go to a place like the Dallas Fort Worth region, and we're down to a couple final communities. And, you can actually walk in and sit down with the mayor and have a conversation, or the mayor can convene 3 department heads who can help expedite things. I think kind of going in and really helping them understand that what may be perceived as a challenge really may not be, and helping them understand just the different experience that they could get. I think the real kind of big challenge day to day when you have a move or you open a new facility is, in particular, when you go to move people to that new site, helping with that process. I mean, a lot of people aren't great about wanting to embrace change for all those human nature reasons we all know. And helping them with that process. I mean, not only just kind of the physical process of moving, finding a home, doing all those things, but probably more importantly, and I think the really good creative economic development groups have excelled at this, of helping those people when they come into community get connected to organizations that are interesting to them. And those could be not-for-profits. Those could be young professional organizations, could be groups like Powder Keg. How do they get linked in to a community? And again, I think especially the younger and the more well-educated that workforce is, the more that is important to them. And I think that's a big psychological hurdle to overcome, and ways we can all help people when we know they're new coming into one of our communities.
Yeah, I think that's been especially challenging this year. And we've just seen a lot of growth in our community as people have made moves. But they're like, hey, I've been in wherever, Nashville or Indianapolis or Raleigh for 3 months, and I've met 3 people. Met meaning maybe had a direct message conversation on LinkedIn or something. That challenge of how do you do that during a pandemic when there aren't physical meetups and events and there are less, coffee opportunities and things like that. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I think the more we can all be thinking proactively in our own communities about how we can be welcoming and finding ways to help people get connected while we're all working a little bit more remotely these days.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, I mean, it may sound selfish in saying it, but for all of us in the communities we live and work in, the more we can have people who come to our areas to live and work, not only feel adjusted and supported, but really get them involved and immersed in things, the better chance we all have of having those people stay here and contribute to great things we all want to see happen in the places where we live. And I think that's really critically important. And again, as we emerge from this COVID world, and hopefully 2021 looks a lot better than 2020, being able to do those things will be really important to the success of all the communities that we all live in.
I couldn't agree more. Well, we've certainly seen lots of reports of states and cities offering incentives for people to move there. For example, I'm just thinking of like Tulsa, Oklahoma. That was definitely in a lot of the press headlines lately. And I know it's not necessarily a new thing, but seems to have gotten a lot more coverage in the media, more people talking about it, potentially more people moving than ever before. I'm interested to know kind of what you're seeing on the company side of this trend. Are you seeing any states incentivizing companies for remote workers? And tying back to this sort of concept of place, do you see economic incentives for companies changing to adapt to most of their employees working remotely? I know we covered on that a little bit, but curious if you kind of talk about that through that lens of place and state incentives.
Yeah, for sure. And I think certainly, it goes without saying this COVID environment has caused state governments, and even in some cases, you mentioned places like Tulsa on the local level, to help incentivize getting really talented people to move to their area, even if they're not physically working, in an environment day to day in office or manufacturing facility in that specific area. And I think it's particularly important for those places that aren't naturally seeing, significant growth in terms of their populations. Those kinds of tools become more and more important. So certainly I would say in particular, the last 3 or 4 months, as kind of COVID became more extended than folks hoped it would, governmental entities saying, hey, here's some things we can do. And people have looked at models like Tulsa, like the state of Vermont, that has done some very innovative things, being one, a small state, two, not growing very quickly, and three, having a lot of small cities and rural areas, about how they could attract talent. And somebody could work in Vermont, and maybe it's working for a company based in New York or Boston, but kind of pick that environment. So we are seeing some tools, whether it's things like grant dollars, tax credits on your personal income tax, helping take care of maybe past student debt. Those kinds of tools, we're starting to see more and more of those adopted. And then, yes, pardon me, to your point about remote workers, and you're right, we touched on a little bit, but yeah, states are now recognizing that if company A has 20 people working in the state remotely, but they don't have a physical location, how can we provide some level of financial support to encourage them to hire more people that live in our state? And I think that'll be a trend that'll not only bear watching, but is likely to have a lot of momentum in 21 and 22 for all the reasons why we talked about earlier. But it is a real opportunity for those places not located on the coast to be able to support not only getting people to come to your state, that choose to live in your state for all that it has to offer, and working remotely for a company, but again, helping those companies that decide to hire a lot of people in your state and not have a physical location, that will help separate the winners and losers going forward.
I'm excited to see it. And I think we've got a lot of winners in the Unvalley right now, just growth, crazy growth. And we're seeing it here at the Unvalley conference today with so many people engaged, learning. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, Larry. I could probably ask you another 3 hours of questions, and sometime we'll get that opportunity. But how can people connect with you and learn more about your team's work at Genovis? What's the best way to plug in and stay connected, since this is sort of what it's all about?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we try to do a really good job of sharing information and kind of sharing stories, so to speak, through our different social media channels. That's something we've really prided ourselves on to help, again, share good messages. And because we're doing so much work in these Unvalley areas that Powder Keg is focused on, there's a lot of good stories there and data points that we think hopefully will be helpful to technology companies, VCs, and others. Also, obviously, we do share a lot, push a lot out through our website on a proactive basis. We do a lot of blogging and article writing. So certainly would direct people to genovis.com to find out more. And then finally, for those that are interested who come to our website, we have a newsletter we send out every other month. And really, again, it's about sharing stories and assets about places across the country and companies that are doing good things and helping spread that message. And we are big believers in, as Powder Keg is, building an ecosystem in places across the country that are not on the coast, not in the valley, and we encourage people to take advantage of that information we share.
Well, and we really appreciate the partnership, Larry, and I really appreciate the conversation today. We do have some awards we'll be giving out to some of the startups here on the award stage, so definitely be sure to hop over there and check those out. Thanks in part to Genovis and our partnership with them. for sponsoring that category of awards. We've got some really interesting ones from all over the country. So definitely hop over and check that out. And also want to encourage you to maybe open another tab and stay in here and discuss what we just talked about. Let's keep the conversation going. Let's keep chatting about it here on Hop In and do exactly what Larry said. Let's find ways to connect people, make them feel welcome, and get plugged into the Unvalley. Thanks, everybody. And thanks, Larry.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.